Hello, and welcome back to another edition of the Export Exchange. I'll start things off with a market update before passing to William to go more in depth on the U.S. port situation and what it means for trade. The first quarter of 2021 was a strong quarter for global trade, up nearly 8% in milk solids. As economies around the world continue to recover and reopen, dairy demand is increasing along with it. As vaccines continue to be rolled out and individuals become more comfortable being out and about again, we expect dairy demand to follow that recovery and show strong demand throughout the year. Looking first at milk production, U.S. milk production has been strong through the first part of the year, up 2.5% through April. U.S. producers also continue to add cows to the herd, contributing to the increase in production. In 2020, roughly 93,000 head were added to the herd, and so far this year, through April, 48,000 cows have been added to the herd. This, along with the continual gains in efficiency, leans toward an outlook of strong milk production through the remainder of the year, which means that there will be plenty of product available for exports. In New Zealand, milk production has seen a strong finish to its 2020-2021 milking season, which helped bump production from the first part of the year to 7.7 million metric tons through April, up 6.4% over the same period last year. While this is strong growth, the production season is now all but finished for this season, and the production growth for the remainder of the year is not anticipated to be as high, and will likely be in line with the more historic production levels. As the 2021-22 season kicks off in Q3, we'll be watching closely to see how pasture conditions develop. EU milk production, while seeing some slight gains more recently, has had a poor start to the year in terms of milk production, down 0.3% through March. Despite significant growth in smaller production countries like Ireland and Poland, overall milk production in the EU is not anticipated to grow significantly in the remainder of 2021 due to a limited growth outlook in the large production countries like Germany and France. Now turning to a U.S. production outlook, U.S. butter stocks have been heavy in recent months. Increased domestic demand through the returning of food service and increased exports have helped only slightly to alleviate some of that burden. Stocks are still comparatively high, and it seems the rush to refill food service pipelines has subsided for the time being. This has weighed on prices, making U.S. butter competitive on the world market, which has resulted in record U.S. butter exports this year. Despite the record exports, stocks will likely continue to weigh on the domestic market and limit any significant gains in prices through the remainder of the year. U.S. non-fat dry milk exports have been significant in the first part of the year. That, along with the increased domestic demand during the same period, has led to a significant drawdown in stocks. From this year's monthly high stocks in February of 160,000 metric tons, stocks decreased 12% to April's level of 141,000 metric tons. This has tightened the U.S. non-fat dry milk market in the first part of the year, leading to an increase in prices, and we expect the market to remain tight through the end of the year, driven primarily by increased global demand for the product. After a wild ride in 2020, volatility in the U.S. cheese market has settled down. Food service returning has been a key driver in increased domestic demand for cheese, and the refilling of food service pipelines in the front part of the year helped tighten the market for cheese, even with waning retail sales, as folks decreased purchases for use at home in favor of dining out. Despite the strong demand both in the U.S. and abroad, new production capacity has helped keep markets balanced. Increases in global whey demand has been dominated by China over the last year with seemingly insatiable demand, and it has continued into 2021. In the first quarter of 2021, U.S. whey exports to China increased 128%, EU whey exports to China increased 37%, and Belarus whey exports to China increased 120%. U.S. production has not kept pace with demand, leading to a drawdown in stocks. U.S. stocks in Q1 of this year are the lowest they've been at in years. However, as cheese production comes fully online, whey production will increase as well. Additionally, while we expect Chinese demand to continue through the end of the year, we're not expecting to see the same level of growth that we've seen over the last year continue through the back half of this year. These two things, additional U.S. whey production and a maxing out of Chinese demand growth, will likely ease some of the tightness of the whey market in the back half of the year. And lastly, we want to spend a moment taking a closer look at shipping and logistics. To talk more on that, I'll pass it to William.
Thanks, Stephen. For this episode's deep dive, I'm going to address the rising freight costs and shipping delays that are happening around the world right now. These delays and added costs have affected all goods that are shipped internationally, and that includes U.S. dairy exports. So today, I want to take a look and see why this is happening and what it means moving forward. So let's start with the why. There are a lot of small issues that have exacerbated the shipping delays around the world. It's from container ships getting stuck in the Suez Canal, or not enough containers, chassis, trucks, or other equipment readily available to meet demand. But there's one underlying fundamental cause behind the delays, at least here in the United States. And that's the American consumer and how the American consumer has behaved during the COVID-19 pandemic. Fundamentally, while we all sat at home and socially distanced from one another, American consumers weren't spending their money on restaurants or gyms or hotels or flights. Instead, they spent it on goods, things like fitness equipment, an outdoor grill, or a better work from home setup. Most of those goods aren't made here in the US, or if they are, they often have many different inputs from abroad. So there was a surge in demand here in the United States for imported products. So US ports, particularly on the West Coast in California, were flooded with ships looking to unload. Naturally, it takes time to unload the ships, particularly since these ships came at a time during a pandemic when all places of work needed to do their best to maintain social distancing and labor was often hard to find. That has naturally slowed the speed at which ships can be unloaded and depart from the US. Additionally, this dynamic has caused global shipping prices to surge. At time of recording, global shipping prices are nearly quadruple what they were at this point last year. But the rise in shipping rates isn't uniform. Prices from Asia to the United States spiked to a much greater degree than the reverse. According to the shipping analysis group Freightos, average freight rates from East Asia to the West Coast of the US are more than 6 times the cost of the US to East Asia. This has created a dynamic where it's more profitable for shipping companies to run blanks or empty containers back to Asia to save a couple of days rather than wait to be loaded full of US products, including US dairy exports. It's also worth noting that this is a global problem. If you look at the reliability of container vessels around the world to arrive and depart on time, you can see a sharp decline starting in the middle of 2020. Essentially, as of today, around 40% of containers depart when they're supposed to. So clearly, the time and cost it takes to move product have increased sharply. And this is coming as dairy exporters try to secure bookings on container ships that are fiercely in demand. Still, U.S. exporters are adapting and working to make sure customers get their product as soon as possible. If we look at where the U.S. is shipping from, we can see there's a clear uptick in shipments out of Northern California, the Pacific Northwest, the East Coast, and even the Gulf of Mexico. And this is coming as those exporters are diversifying which ports they ship from. But exports out of Southern California, which has been the epicenter for much of the delays in the fourth quarter of 2020 and early this year, have seen their share of exports decline. So overall, this is good news. We're diversifying, but there's still plenty of ships to be unloaded outside of port, and carrier companies continue running blanks, which means rolled or canceled bookings continue. However, looking longer term, the most optimistic aspect is that there are increasing vaccination rates here in the United States. The country is opening up. And this means that consumers are returning or hope to return to spending more on the services I mentioned earlier, restaurants, hotels, sporting events, etc. And that should then allow U.S. ports to clear the current backlog of ships and return to a more normal shipping environment. However, the point at which that happens is still very much in the air. So obviously working with your suppliers to understand these delays and specific nuances particular to your order are crucial. As I mentioned, the port delays are not uniform, nor limited to the US, so communication with your US supplier is always going to be the best way to assess how these global issues affect your business. But moving forward, the U.S. Dairy Export Council is here to help and here to listen. So thank you to everyone who took the time to listen to this month's Export Exchange. We hope you have a great day. Thanks so much.